Well, with Bakugan X Beyblade around the corner, what is there really left to talk about Gen 2, aka the Battle Planet reboot show? There is actually a lot to talk about. When Bakugan was announced to be getting a reboot, it got people pretty excited, mostly the audience that lived and experienced the original Bakugan series as kids. Now all grown up, they were pretty stoked about getting to relive their childhood again through a brand new line of toys, a kick-ass card game, and a brand new show. The first season was released in 2019, Armored Alliance followed up in 2020, Geogan Rising released in 2021, Evolutions came out in 2022, and finally on Netflix, Legends came out in 2023. Geogan Rising surprisingly was able to air on time despite COVID hitting the world, and Bakugan Legends airing strictly on Netflix in 2023. The series actually was a hit, surpassing the original's runtime despite its mixed reception. Many fans praising its new direction, simple stories, and action, while others criticizing its direction to a fault, increasingly pointless filler episodes, and insulting audience intelligence to the point where sometimes it's just boring. Now look, I do have my criticisms of the show myself, and I do understand where people are coming from when talking negatively about the show, but I do enjoy how they managed to modernize Bakugan up to the point of retaining its identity of online community engagement. When a show actually has actual effort being put into it, it makes for great entertainment to watch. Is it the best show in the world? Absolutely not, but it's still far from bad when doing things right, and I think when it does do things right, it deserves to be spotlighted and talked about. And that's exactly what we're gonna do here. This is the top 10 awesome moments of the Gen 2 show. Number 10. The Monster Fights. One of the main things that went with this reboot was changing the action from card game mechanic to Pokemon style monster fighting. This was seen as controversial since there was a real life card game just sitting there that can be adopted into animation, but instead they went with giant monsters fighting like Godzilla commanded by discount Pokemon trainers. They don't even try to hide the fact that they are copying Pokemon. Some of the attacks even have the same name as some attacks from Pokemon.
Poison Sting!
Thunder Shock!
Heck, there was even one attack that blatantly ripped off Dragon Ball Z. But when there is original action and it really gets going, it actually does make pretty fun entertainment to watch, especially when there is actual activity from the brawlers themselves going for Baku cores on the ground and throwing them at their Bakugan to power them up. But as the seasons went on, there was less and less of that happening, instead just throwing one or two cores to unleash whatever gimmick they had going for that year to finish the scene. But I can tell they did put a lot of effort into animating their fight scenes to make them as cool and impactful as possible. An obvious example would be the fights with the big villains at the end of each season. Or how about the train fight between Magnus and Trip? The fight between Dan and McHugh in Geogan Rising was cool. They even paid homage to Godzilla action in the Arc and Armored Alliance when the Awesome Brothers are in Japan. I think the action definitely did stand on its own, and it was able to stamp that as a reboot's identity, and let's be honest, it's big giant creatures that look like your toys in real life smashing each other in the face. Of course kids are going to like watching that. If you weren't into the story, at least you could get into the action. Number 9. Paul Sung-Young Lee as Spartillion.
I know you're watching. Come to face me, Dragonoid of Hyrule.
Yes, I'm not kidding, nor did I misspeak. Paul Sung-Young Lee was in Bakugan. You may recognize him as Carson Teva recently in The Mandalorian, and older fans may recognize him as Appa from Kim's Convenience. I was genuinely shocked they actually managed to bring Paul Sung-Young Lee to have a minor role in Geogan Rising. When Spartillion was introduced, he was a badass. He was beating up Bakugan left and right and calling out Drago each time until he comes, kicks ass, and leaves like a Terminator. It's revealed he's a Sentinel or agent of the Supreme Bakugan Council, but later it's revealed specifically he is a servant of Villok and was helping Villok the entire time as Geogan Rising went on. Spartillion really was a kick-ass silent assassin that can really handle himself in the fight, and it's that mystery around him that we really don't understand that makes him more enjoyable to see every time he appears on our screens. Because he defeated Drago on his own, we know what he's capable of, and we get scared about what he's going to do when he shows up. He was like Boba Fett, a quiet but deadly character that we know a little to nothing about, but realize his badassery is enough to make us panic and put our own story or legend on. only to go out in a very lame way. Yeah, he gets betrayed by the very person that he helped become very strong. It's like the old saying, he who's the cause of someone else becoming powerful is the agent of his own destruction. And in this case, Spartillion kinda got what was coming to him. I got a feeling that he was written in a way that he wasn't meant to appear as much on screen because they wanted to have someone who was a big deal voice him. Even though Spartillion was a joy to watch, I do wish we got like a few more scenes with this guy, or he came back for future seasons. But the fact that he didn't really supports my point that he was written and animated to be in the show for Paul Sung-Young Lee. His performance was pretty good and definitely left an impact on the audience. Number 8. Different gimmicks each season. Let's be real, the actual purpose of having the show is to sell the real life toys. And it got a lot more aggressive starting in season 2 when they started putting the actual toys in the show again like they did in the original series. The first season was about selling the Ultras and even the cards because the Hyper and Titan Evolutions was contained in the cards. Season 2 had Bakugan Evolutions, Season 3 had Geogans, Season 4 had the Metal Bakugan, Nano Guns, and different forms like Strength and Speed and Genesis. Oh yeah, that was an aggressive time. And Legends was even more recycled designs with different paint jobs as well as light up Bakugan. I can't really harp on it since it's a pretty common marketing technique that practically every other franchise does. The thing I really liked about the change in gimmicks every season was that the changes actually had an effect on our main heroes. Either it's new or they have to figure it out, or it's something they have to overcome because the bad guys are using it. Sticking gimmicks and incorporating them into a show in order to sell more toys in real life, it's not always easy, and most of the time it may not end up making sense. Like in Evolutions, they just forgot all about the Geogans and Nanogons all of a sudden appear. At least they tried to explain the Baku gear and the Nova Light was fitted into the main story, but when they managed to integrate the gimmicks into the show and actually make something entertaining out of it, it's pretty good, and it's a very good way to keep the show fresh and entertaining. So yeah, it's pretty cool when they manage to add this effectively as they can, and the gimmicks not only make for imagination come to life in the show, but in real life they're still fun. Number 7. Masato's character development. Masato Kazami is Shun Kazami's cousin who works for Shun's strict father. At first, when he's introduced, he's portrayed as a pretty big asshole, easily dismissing Shun and the rest of the Awesome Brawlers, arrogant, self-absorbed, and obsessed with not being a failure, clearly because of some traumatic past with his dad, and also seemed to be jealous of Shun being the heir to the company that he had to work his position for. Eventually, after causing a near disastrous incident, he becomes trapped in the maze and almost starves to death until Serpentine saves him, causing him to have a huge change in character. Masato's introduction was very well done, clearly making us want to hate him, thinking he has no redeeming qualities about him whatsoever, but as Battle Planet goes on and we see why he does what he does and the kind of person he is, until finally we see a huge redemption arc for him, being turned from someone who is an obsessed narcissist to nearly dying with nothing and finding purpose and compassion for the Bakugan. Masato's story is really personal and realistic, being able to connect with people who may have experienced being scared of failure, and sometimes failure was the best thing you needed to have to learn to be better as a person. Maybe someone who watched Masato's story was probably going through what Masato was doing when introduced and changed for the better. Or maybe someone watching thought the same as Masato, failing and losing everything and thinking there's nothing else other than death. The character and Jeff Young's performance in the character really touches in real life and gives amazing lessons all on his own. Sure, he was kind of a sideline after the first season and some supporting character, but I personally think that it's probably for the best. You don't want to be milking a story like that was very well told and have a bunch of random stories that don't make sense to tarnish it. But when he comes back to brawling one more time in the second season, it was a genuinely great moment seeing him kick ass once more. But yeah, Masato, I think they did a pretty great job on it, even if it was unintentional, and still remains to me one of the more interesting characters in the reboot series. Number 6. These scenes.
How do you think you could be a teacher? You're barely qualified to be a student. You're a joke. Being stubborn for no good reason is so childish. You're a joke. You got what you deserve by playing stupid games. You're a real joke. What a clown. We don't need some internet clown getting in our way. Dan really is the ultimate clown.
Yeah, I got nothing else. Moving on. Number 5. Ajit and Storm's story. When Ajit was introduced in Armored Alliance, they kept his backstory and his allegiances a secret. He was built up as a powerful auraless brawler, and the first few episodes they kept his partnership with Storm hidden. The two had a very great dynamic and story that was built up and told throughout the second season. At first, Ajit being an insanely loyal apprentice, almost like a son to Storm, but it wasn't until Ajit gets more into Bakugan and his relationship with the Awesome Brawlers grows stronger that the bond between Ajit and Storm begins to diminish. Ajit's character goes from being a phantom thief to someone who wants to follow his own path in life, and evidently that is something Storm doesn't take very well, as he's spent years trying to shape Ajit to possibly succeed him. Their relationship turns to a complete 180 during the first Bakugan Battle League tournament, that Storm even blackmails Ajit into making the choice to stop being a brawler and continue being a thief. Most of the time it reaches uncomfortable levels of conflict for Ajit, giving us kind of a look into what Ajit's mental state could possibly be, having to be forced into a kind of position that he was in. It was a very intricate story that was pretty much what took over the story of the Bakugan Battle League arc, and when Ajit confronts Storm, Storm is already controlled by Havoc and goes crazy, obsessively trying to destroy Ajit as revenge. The whole dynamic of the relationship was very deep, and the time they ever see each other, they just could not express their feelings for each other's actions until later in the season, when they team with each other one more time to escape Mr. Gold, and that was their final goodbye to each other as father and son. We don't see Storm ever again for another 3 seasons until Legends, when he comes back to face Ajit as part of Hanoj's team, and the ending really gave us a conclusion that they both truly deserved. In the second season, when Storm was saying goodbye, it was a hateful and vengeful goodbye. Still unable to accept Ajit's decision to walk away from the Phantom Thief life, but in Legends, when there is a scene at the end reflective of the scene from Season 2, Storm practically says he is proud of him.
You rejected the way of the Phantom Thief. You must be punished, Ajit. The next time we meet, I will steal your future. Then you should keep going down your own path. We shall meet again.
It's almost like the mask of the Phantom Thief is the illness of their relationship between each other that poisons their lives. While Storm seems like he has already accepted this life, Ajit was able to be freed from it. If you have watched the entire journey between Ajit and Storm throughout the entire series, you can see for yourself the journey that these two have brought you on. And even when you couldn't get into their story, they are still both pretty cool characters on their own. But there is always one question about Ajit that I think we should at least deserve an answer for. What is his last name? Number 4. Casting Julius Cho as Magnus.
It's Magnus, trust me. It's a name you're never going to forget.
Indeed, we never forgot that name. Now when Bakugan Reboot came out, people thought Magnus was like a new masquerade, but that can't be further from the truth. I've always been able to pay attention to Bakugan as long as I have because of Magnus and the stuff they do with him, and I think a lot of it has to do with his voice performance. Out of all the people that really captured my attention the most in the show, it was Julius Cho's performance as Magnus. I mean, if you ask me what this dark, broody, and aggressive character would sound like, Julius's voice would be right on the money. He can do it all. He can be dramatic, aggressive, sympathetically soft. I think that they really nailed the casting for Magnus. One of the highlights of the show that I think is probably the best performance in the whole series was when Magnus and Dan are having their final clash, powering up for one more move, and Magnus has a monologue about his backstory and why he's able to do everything he does. Eventually, Magnus's character gets controlled by Tico, and Julius puts on the crazy but struggling performance very well. And the seasons onward, he's a bit more of a Batman character that, again, he does pretty well too. Despite the writers outright sabotaging Magnus' character in Geogan Rising, I think Julius' impassioned performance was what really saved it from falling off a cliff. You can really tell that Julius puts his everything in his voice performance because he really seems like he truly cares about the character, and in my opinion, I think he has earned MVP of this reboot series. Every time he was on the screen and hear him talk, he just steals the show.
Time for you to face the Thunderbolt of Judgment! Win away!
Whether he is plotting against the Awesome Brawlers, fighting off bad guys, leading the charge against Hanoj, or teaming with Dan, you can't deny that Julius as Magnus is truly badass.
I will crush the Awesome Ones. Hear me?
Number 3. The Villains. Now, admittedly, I didn't watch much of the original series past the Battle Brawler season, but from what I saw with villains like Masquerade and Hal G, it was always the quality villains that Bakugan was able to produce, and the reboot season was no different. To me, villains make the stories more interesting, and sometimes the villains can really engage you in the experience of the drama. Sometimes you will actually understand where they're coming from, or think they were right all along. Or maybe they're just entertaining to watch because they're so cartoonishly strong. And interesting villains can make for really good entertainment, which was what we got in Bakugan. We had Tico wanting to control everything and save Bakugan from wanting to fight all the time, Havoc being a cartoonish crazy joker, Vilok is a racist, Wrath is a power-hungry psycho, and Hanoj is, well, a big meathead, but he was still fun. Then there was the small villains too in the series, like China Riot was a spoiled brat, Sophie is an SJW, Faustus is like the Green Goblin, Philomena Dusk is a corrupt corporate. The reboot has actually produced quite top quality villains to keep us entertained. Many of them actually have depth and aren't really throwaway characters. I guess good can come from bad. Number 2. Jason Deline as Dragonoid. One of the most hyped things about the reboot was the reveal that Jason Deline would be returning as Dragonoid. He was the original voice of Dragonoid in the original series, and fans were excited that he would be coming back to voice the reboot version. Funny enough, Jason revealed on my podcast with him that he wasn't actually meant to come back as Drago. They were going to look for someone else, but they went with him after he got the audition call and showed he can still do the voice after almost 10 years.
Cease your scrubbing, human! I am not your toy!
You totally do not need Z. You need battles.
Jason definitely took a different approach towards the reboot version of Drago compared to his original version, appearing a lot more easygoing and loyal to Dan in the reboot as opposed to aggressive and humbling while still retaining the naive nature when it comes to human interactions.
That metal monster is eating humans. We should battle it, Dan.
I ask you, is this all just a game to you?
Yeah, sure, Jason still had a bit of silly lines in his reboot, and some of the dialogue he was given to project onto Drago does still seem a bit ridiculous, but to be fair, it was the same way in the original series. But every time Drago shows up on screen, especially during those final fights at the end of the seasons, you know you're in for a swell time, and the experience is really amplified with Jason's performance. He's like what James Earl Jones is to Darth Vader. You can't imagine anyone else doing that voice. Now, as of the time of this recording, I don't know if the next reboot they'll give the new Dragonoid a voice, and if they do, I don't know if they'll go with someone new or recast Jason again. But Jason's performance as Dragonoid in the Battle Planet reboot was amazing, and shows that even after all these years, he is still Dragonoid. The Gen 2 show has had a lot of great moments that unfortunately didn't make this top 10 list, but before we get to number 1, I just want to give an honorable mention to a lot more moments that the show has had. There is quite a few though. So it's time for a lightning round! Jonah Weinberg as Dan Kuzo. While I have not heard of Jonah before he was cast, he has actually put on a pretty stellar performance, capturing the arrogant but kind-hearted and naive nature of this 14-year-old heroic boy quite well. That Leah episode, giving us the background of Leah Venegas and showing us the vulnerable side of her character, still grieving over the loss of her dad and finding the strength to move on while still keeping his memory, resulting in achieving evolution. It was great and one of the best episodes of Battle Planet. Margarita Valderrama did an incredible job with this episode, and I highly recommend you check it out. Lightning being a brawler. It's a dog being able to Bakugan brawl. It's so cute, and even better, he actually gets his own episodes with dialogue. That is so amazing. What else can I say about it? The exploration into the Bakugan worlds. We got a lot more expanded look in Vestroya and Geogan Rising. Just being able to see the world of the Bakugan and the different factions a lot more past Geogan Rising is still pretty awesome. Cosmic Power! This Shun scene. Should I go on?
Tumpy, I love you. Come and join the Tumpy crew. Tumpy, Tumpy, you can get them too.
And the number 1 awesome moment of the Battle Planet reboot series is the 45-minute special, Evolutions Unleashed. This was supposed to be the real first episode of the Evolution season, but strangely it was aired in the middle of the season instead. Despite the fact that it was written to actually be the episode to premiere on TV, instead they aired the second episode of the season, which confused everyone, and it wasn't until Evolutions was put on Netflix that we got this episode. Outside of the episode airing history, it was a really amazing episode. The first time they did a 45-minute special instead of the 11-minute two-parters we've always gotten. It had the action, the dilemma, the introduction to new characters, they actually acknowledged the change in design for once, they even had a fake out where it looked like Drago died, and the finale of this episode was a really fun ride. It actually really felt like I was watching a new Bakugan season, rather than the Awesome Brawlers just discovering the new gimmick of the season and just continuing on about their day as if nothing changed. Evolutions Unleashed really set the season up with the way it was done and really followed up the questions that we had in the previous season. Despite the continuity issues it had regarding the Awesome Brawlers' other Bakugan, it was still a pretty fun episode that really got me invested into watching Evolutions a lot more. Like I said in my original review, this should have been the episode to premiere on TV instead of being skipped for the second episode, because it could have had that shock value effect. But Netflix has listed it correctly, so if you haven't seen Evolutions yet, then you will still get that joy, which I envy. And I also reiterate that they should have done these 45-minute specials a lot more often before the show ended, like we could have gotten something pretty special if you at least made the first episode of Legends 45 minutes. The potential for new story and what you could do would be incredible, and I know there are people that use this episode as an example of why the two-parter 11-minute episodes should have just been abandoned in favor of the long episodes. But yeah, this was definitely the top moment of the awesome moments this reboot has done, and if you haven't made it this far yet into the series, you'll be genuinely surprised. So yes, that was my top 10 awesome moments from the Gen 2 show. Let me know what your favorite moment was in the comments down below. As well, if you enjoyed this content, please be sure to support BakuTalk by pressing the thumbs up and give us a subscribe for more awesome Bakugan content. I've been Haru Ren, and thank God for Rapid Fire. Bye!